Hi everyone, my name is Tammy Moses and I work on the issue of hoarding, and I am here today to talk about addressing the safety issues in hoarding situations. And frequently we may or may not recognize some of the issues that can come up in hoarding situations. And today I want to talk a little more about that because there are a lot of safety risks that come along with hoarding. And oftentimes we're called into these situations and we don't realize what we're walking into. And so it's really helpful to have a better understanding of what is going on. So I have 5 things I want to talk about today, and just mention them because often you get pulled into these things and you're not really sure what to do. So thank you for stopping by and chatting with me. If you have questions, please do drop them in the comments and I will do my best to address them. So I'll just briefly tell you, I will talk about avalanche risks and what that means in these situations. I'm going to talk about fire hazards, structural damage that can show up, what happens if the fridge doesn't work, and also a discussion on how to resolve this, which we often term safety day or a safety assessment where you can try to solve the issue. So the first piece of this is an avalanche risk. And what I mean is you can have piles of things and they can fall down. And as we go through our aging, our mobility is sometimes impaired, or we slow down, our reaction time is a little slower. We might need to use devices to get around, maybe a cane or a wheelchair, or maybe you're coming home from a surgery of some sort and you're using crutches and you need to be able to navigate your space. And if you have a lot of stuff and you accidentally hit it, now things can fall, and now you have a trip and a fall hazard. It makes it hard to get through your space, and it's really challenging to go through some kind of emergency like a trip or a fall. And if you're older, those things can lead to other medical complications. So there is a real risk in having a lot of things that can fall down, and it increases your trip and fall hazard. So that's one of the things to be cognizant of. The next thing is fire hazards. And if you are in a situation where there's a lot of things and your plugins are blocked, you might run extension cords through all your paper and your boxes and your clothes to get to that plug-in so that you can have your lamp where you want it, or your heating pad, or whatever it is. But extension cords can inherently cause a problem, and it's something to be cognizant of, because if you read some of the things, like the safety warnings on some of these things, it tells you to not cover it with a rug or a blanket or any of those things. So there are issues with having too many things and not being able to reach the plugins and use them appropriately. Another aspect in the fire hazard is around having a stove or burners that have a lot of things right next to them. And there is a lot of issues with things falling onto a burner, or catching fire potentially if you have paper and boxes and leftover takeout containers. And if you have that right next to your stove where you are cooking, that increases a fire hazard as well. And another thing that I see coming up quite frequently is, because someone who hoards doesn't want someone to come in and fix anything that's broken, they will often use the stove or the oven to heat their space. And again, it's a safety issue, and you're specifically said don't heat your space with, the gas stove going, but people will still do that because they don't want to allow anyone to come into their space. So it's another aspect around fire hazards. The third thing is structural damage can be caused because if you have a lot of things, some buildings aren't designed to hold 50 years worth of books in an entire room full of books. And the heaviness, the weight can be a problem in some structural situations. The other part of that is if there's a lot of clutter, a lot of things have fallen, and you can't see maybe what damage has been done. For example, I worked on a situation where a basement was flooded and the landlord never knew that it was flooded. The tenant did not tell them. And so when it came time for that person to move, there was a lot of damage to the carpet. There was mold on the walls. There were things that you could not see until you moved the boxes away and the things away. So you may not know what kind of damage is going on until you take some of that stuff away from the wall or pick it up off the floor. And a lot of times, for example, people won't report it because they don't want to be evicted. They don't want their landlord to see the condition of the property. On the flip side of that, sometimes people own properties and don't do inspections as frequently as they should, or they might do an inspection and think by saying, just clean it up, that will actually cause action to happen, and that in general does not. Frequently, someone that hoards doesn't see that there's a problem. Academically, I would say, like they might know it, but they don't see it in the same way. Otherwise known as clutter blindness. So it's important to think about what is happening in your space if you have way too much stuff, and from a person living there as well as someone who owns that building. And other people's issues can flow into other tenants' spaces if you are not cognizant of what's going on. I had a conversation yesterday where we were talking about the fact that just one person that hoards, say you have a unit of 30 people, or I'm sorry, say you have a complex of 30 people, and one person in there has a hoarding issue, it can spill over to other people's quality of life. So there is concern around, you have one, you might have a bigger problem than you think. So it's important to not be silent. You can be kind, you can start to address it, but don't be silent, because in general it does not get worse or better unless there is a crisis. Like there has to be some kind of crisis point where there is a shift in what's going on in a hoarding situation, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending on how you are looking at this. So the next thing is looking at a refrigerator and a freezer. So sometimes the fridge will go out, and then you will no longer have a space to keep your fresh food. Not to mention the food in there might become rotten or something that where you can't use it. And now that person who hoards has a fridge full of food they can't use. They won't ask someone to come in and deal with the fridge because, again, they don't want someone to see what conditions they are living in. And on the other side, if you're a repair person coming out, you might encounter hoarding and go, what the hell is this? And at what point are you required as a professional to go into that environment? It is another side of the coin. But the next part of that is you may get fresh food and now you have nowhere to put it. And so things like the things will get thawed out because someone will put it in the cooler, and then later they'll go back and put it in the freezer. So you're thawing and on-thawing, which is not good for most products in that situation. And it's really unhealthy to have rotten food in your space in a fridge that doesn't work. Like, that is so unhealthy. And there is a lack of insight often for people to see that if they cleared out the food that isn't useful, if they allowed someone to come in despite the surroundings to fix their refrigerator, then they'd have a space to put their new food that they're getting. And honestly, one of the grossest things is cleaning out a fridge that has rotting food in it. If you've never had the joy, you're blessed if you ever have or need to, make sure you wear gloves and a mask, like a respirator type mask where you can actually breathe, because there's a lot of smell that comes out. And on that smell note and how it impacts like a big building is someone might have a hoarding issue and you kind of just ignore it and you don't really think about it until you start to have like a smell, an odor coming out of that apartment. Or because the apartment or the building is so, that space is so full, they might start stacking things in the front of their apartment door or on the side, and now you're impeding the walkway, all the other tenants. So it's really important to not let it be silent, not let it be an issue where it gets out of control, because people can be evicted for this, and now that leads to homelessness, and now they have this on their record. And so there's like this big snowball effect that can happen if we just think the issue will go away, or that if we're quiet that's going to resolve something, because it honestly, it does not. And so the fifth thing I'm going to talk about is how do you resolve some of these issues. And again, if you're dealing with a space where you are, say it's just clutter, say it's stuff, and it's books and newspapers and clothes, and it's things that you could easily move or put to the side or sort and reduce the amount of things that are there, you can really look at a safety day so that you can reduce the amount of stuff that might fall. You would want to keep things less than 36-inch high throughout the residence, and you would like to keep a 36-inch path throughout the residence in case people need to access you. If you fall or something happens, emergency personnel need at least 36 inches to get a gurney in there to get you out. And so it's very valuable to look at that from a safety perspective. And it's valuable to start a conversation based on your safety concerns for that individual or the family or the people living there, or even the animals. That's a whole nother issue. But if you can look at it from a safety perspective and how is this impacting the human perspective, you'll get a little more traction on resolving it in general. The times when a safety day would not work are when you may have infestations of rodents, cockroaches, bed bugs, fleas. There are times when you will have to take more direct, massive action to resolve a hoarding situation, although forced cleanouts are not the first choice and they aren't overly effective, because in hoarding there's trauma, and if you aren't dealing with those underlying issues, then it can be really difficult to help someone not hoard a space again. So there are valid reasons for having a conversation with the person that hoards and helping them work through their story and helping them understand the benefit of making decisions about their stuff. Because depending on where you're at on the issue, depending on where you are, are you facing eviction? Is it just an inspection that you need to pass? I say just, but it can be a lot of drama when an inspection is coming up for someone that hoards. So, and there's a lot of fear there that they may lose their housing situation. So it is valid that they have concerns, but it's also valid that, all the other tenants might have concerns, or the property management or the investor who owns the place. There is this whole picture we need to look at holistically. And there are resources and people working on the issues of hoarding, but there is a need for a more collective, direct way of addressing this, because with 19 million people in the USA alone dealing with hoarding, that's a lot of people, and that's a lot of families, and that's a lot of communities impacted by the issue of hoarding. So there's a need for more cohesive discussions and solutions. And I invite people to join me in my the Hoarding Solution community. It's a group on Facebook, because I need to know who's out there, who's working on this, and who wants to try to resolve this in a broader way, because a lot of us are doing our efforts in our areas, and that's really needed. But we also need that collective voice to say, hey, this is a bigger problem. How can we resolve this so that everyone can potentially come to some sort of resolution where people stay housed, people deal with their trauma, landlords' properties aren't destroyed, we aren't evicting people due to mental health issues. Like, there's this whole big onion, if you will, and I keep finding more and more layers as I focus on this and dive into it. So I will put a link eventually to the group that I have, the Hoarding Solution group, so that people can join us if you are interested in learning about it, resolving it, if you're caring about a family member that has this problem, if you grew up in it. There's just so many different people and industries that are impacted, and really we collectively can resolve this, but we really need to be talking about it so that we can look at what's all the things that are going on and how we can effectively resolve some of these situations. So again, today I just talked about avalanche risk, the fire hazards, the structural damage that can show up, what happens if you don't get your fridge repaired, and also we talked about safety day and how to make a space safe so that someone potentially could come home and maybe not do an entire clean out, but you are making it safe by having a 36-inch path and keeping your piles of things no higher than 36 inches. It just decreases the chance that they will fall, basically. So I thank everyone for stopping by here. I see Mr. Richard Kaufman with the Comeback Coach, and he has an awesome podcast. And Donald Dotson I see with Dotson Designs, who does great leather work. And I see Carrie Murray Beavers here, and she has Carrie's Scars and Stripes Coffee. So I thank everyone here for stopping by and checking in. And if you drop by here and want to drop a link to what you do, feel free to do that. All right. I don't see any questions at the moment, so happy to connect with people, but I hope you all have a great day.